Good afternoon. My name is Julie Interrante, and we are here today to talk about life after loss. And before we do that, I just want to say welcome. Welcome to ACC and welcome to this program. I want to say thank you for being here today. This is the fourth in a four-part series on conversations in dying. And I know that it isn't always easy to come to this conversation. It's not one that culturally that in the West we have very well, and I don't know generally that it's something that as human beings we want to think about the fact that we will not be here forever. And yet it is a really powerful time in our lives, and it can be a very intimate and connected time. So today we're talking about life after loss. The first three sessions that we have done, we have talked about the dying process. We've talked about how to begin to have the end-of-life conversation with friends and family. We've talked about how to make meaning and stay present throughout the process. And today we're going to talk about how do we live with and walk with grief after a loved one has died. So I just want to say welcome and thank you for being in the room today. Thank you for taking time out of what I know are very busy days to come together and actually create space to explore the idea of what it's like to live when someone that we love has died. One of the things that I think is really important for us to remember is that in all things in life, there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. That everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end, including me, right? And including the people that I love. And so the reason I say that today is because it can be really helpful as a general rule in my life, and this is something I practice myself, reminding myself that just like the flowers, just like the trees, just like all things, I am also moving, right? I am also on the trajectory of not being here someday. Just that idea helps me, first of all, in my life generally, and it most definitely helps me when I am in grief. So I have a few guests here with me today, and I'm going to take a minute to introduce them. They are here to talk about their grief experience, okay? So each one of the people, there are three guests here with me today, and each one of them has had a particular loss, at least one, if not more, okay? So I want to start by introducing Maureen. Maureen is here. She lost her partner. And Maureen, remind me how long ago?
It'll be a year on the 27th of May.
A year on the 27th of May, yes. And so she's here to talk about her particular experience. And her partner actually chose the dignity in dying, right to die option for the ending of his life. And so she's going to share with us a little bit about that experience, as well as her experience of walking with loss, walking with grief. One of the things I want to say right at the outset is, you know, grief is something that I guess I always say grief does us. We don't do grief, right? And I want to say that up front because sometimes I know that when we start to talk about our losses, our tears will come up or some sort of emotion will come up that catches us a little bit off guard. I've seen this happen often in my own life and with people that I work with. And so I just want to say that the people that are here today are coming in a really vulnerable way because they're going to talk about their loss, which means that they're going to be in touch with their broken hearts. And I know we talked a bit about living with a broken heart the last 3 weeks, and this is one of those moments where everyone on the floor today is coming saying, I'm willing to share that part of myself. So sitting next to Maureen is Mark, and sitting next to Mark is Esta. Mark and Esta are a married couple, and they are here because they lost their daughter. Their daughter died, remind me how long ago?
3 years and almost 4 years. Well, August.
August, it will be
2018.
4. Right. So they lost their daughter to cancer, and they cared for her throughout the completion of her life. And then 2 years after that, Mark's sister, Julia, or he refers to her as Jude, also died from a cancer. And so they are going to talk a bit about both of those experiences, okay? So before we go to that, though, I want to talk just generally about grief. And I want to show you a piece that I think is really important for us to take a look at, because here's the thing that I know. It seems as if, as human beings and as a culture, we have some ideas about how grief should look, right? So if someone's in grief, we're going to see them crying, or we're going to see them sad. And I just want to explain and be really clear here that grief can look like a whole lot of things. I know in my own life, I have experienced many, many feelings when I have lost someone that I love. Grief can look like anger. It can look like control. It can look like uncertainty and fear. It can look like lethargy. Grief doesn't come in a pattern, right? There's no right or wrong way to walk with your grief. The only thing that I really want to encourage all of us in the room is that we just need to let it be present. We need to honor it, take time with it, give it the respect that it really needs. Because here's the thing, when we love deeply, we are going to grieve deeply, okay? I just want you to keep that in mind. When you love deeply, you grieve deeply. And we happen to live in a culture that says, you get 3 days to get through it, then you need to get back to work or you need to get back to your life. And what I want to say about that is generally, people in our culture kind of expect that. And I just want you to know that that's not true. Living with grief is not something that we close up. It's not something that goes away. When we love deeply, we grieve deeply, and we never really completely close that spot in our hearts. But we do learn how to integrate our losses, how to let them soften us, and how to allow our losses and our sadness to become part of the power and the goodness of who we are on the planet, rather than letting our losses diminish us. That's why it's so important to take time with our grief, our sadness, and our loss. After all, when I lose someone that I love a great deal, the last thing in the world that I want is for somebody to try and take that away from me. My grief is mine, and I get to have it and feel it. It is part of how we heal. When we lose someone that we love, we are kind of dropped headlong into our own transition, right? So if we love someone and care for them up to their dying, often what happens is there tends to be some relief when someone finally makes that transition from being in the body to being out of the body. That too is normal, and then usually behind the relief comes the sadness, the anger, the disorienting feelings, the uncertainty, all of that. So I say all this just to be sure that all of us hear that there is no right way, there's no wrong way to do our grief. It's really about being present to whatever it is that comes up. So I'm going to ask Sean to put on the screen, there it is. This is a piece that I happened to find just a few years ago. You know, we've all learned about the stages of grief thanks to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who I think brought a lot of this information to the forefront. But here's how we kind of think about it, as if it's like the side that says stages of grief. We're just going to go through them all in a neat little pattern, and then we'll be done, right? Well, I'm here to tell you that my experience has been much more like the one on the other side, right? This is really how grief happens. It goes all over the place. There's no direct path out of or through my loss experience. It really looks a lot like this very scribbly diagram on the right-hand side, okay? So I just wanted to show this to you as a visual for what it is that we're talking about. Thanks, Sean. Okay, so with that, I want to take some time to hear from the people that are here with me today, and we will continue this conversation through their sharing their experience. And so, Maureen, I'd like to start with you. If you would just tell folks that are here about your partner. You can certainly use his name. You can just tell us a little bit about what you guys did together when you found out that he was ill, just a little bit about that path, and then how the dying experience was for you and what you've moved into since then. And I'll help you along. That was a lot of things, right?
A lot of things.
Yeah.
Ken was, we were partners for about almost 15 years, and we didn't live together. He had been a flight engineer in the Air Force, and he lived in Travis, and I lived in Sacramento, and for a variety of reasons, it was better for us to stay where we were. What we did together was travel. We are both birders, that is, bird watchers, and we traveled all over the country in his truck with a camper on it, various campers actually, and chasing birds and going to wonderful parks and the Everglades, and we went all over. It was lovely. And because we didn't live together, we did that on weekends, and we'd go off for 1, 2, 3 weeks at a time often. And it was quite wonderful, and stayed in touch in the meantime. I think we had only been together 2 years, probably 2 or 3 years, when he received a diagnosis of prostate cancer. And early on, they said he was not going to survive it. Early on, they said, we will do what we can to push it down the calendar, but you will not outrun this. So that was a terrible shock. And over the years, he had various and sundry things happen that maybe helped or maybe did push it down the calendar. But just before COVID shut the world down, he started on a regimen of chemo that they told him would make him very ill. And a lot of people choose not to go with that regimen, but he wanted to do it. So he was doing that at his house, from his house to the hospital at the Air Force Base in Travis. And then COVID came along. Well, the whole world blew up because they didn't want me near him in case I made him ill, and he was at the hospital all the time, going back and forth for chemo, and so it wasn't good for me to be near him. And besides which, he was so sick, he was pretty much on the bathroom floor all the time. So that went on for a long time, through last August, and then he was on chemo from March to August. And then a few months went by and he wasn't any better, and finally he decided that he needed to be I convinced him actually to go into hospice. And the hospice people, the Solano County hospice people, were incredible. And he went into hospice. They took care of him in his own home, and I still wasn't able to go down there. We would meet, and while he could, we would walk a little bit. But anyway, toward the end, he decided that he would pick his date. He did not want to see it through to the end. And so he did that. And he chose a date in June. And before that date came, he had an experience where he was not able to get out of bed, fell out of bed, couldn't get up, and called the doctor the next day and said, I want to do this as soon as possible. So on May the 27th, he took the drugs. Very complicated, convoluted sort of thing to deal with. It really was. And the hospice worker and a friend he had worked with were there with him. I was not there. And I wasn't there because, frankly, I'm not very good at being around people who are dying. I wasn't there with my father, my sister, my brother. I've had a lot of people die, and I haven't been there for any of them. But what I did do, and this was Julie's idea, is I went to a wonderful nature preserve on the Feather River, about half an hour from Sacramento, called Bobolane. And it is a place that Ken learned about through me. It was a place we spent a lot of time hiking and walking and birding. And he was the land steward there. He took care of that land the last couple of years of his life. So I was there on a bench that he made at a site on the Feather River named after him. And I stayed there until the social worker told me that the deed was done, and then I went home.
Thanks, Maureen. I really appreciate your willingness to share your story. I just want to ask a few questions. So were you aware, once COVID kind of shut things down, that there was a part of you that was already grieving? Or was that, like, how was that for you, knowing that he was ill, knowing that he was not getting better? I'm assuming that you had, at some point in that period of time, Ken told you that he was going to choose a date. And I'm wondering if you're willing to share some of that piece of that.
Well, the COVID changed everything, because instead of being able to join him, they really didn't want that to happen. And so when he told me he was going to pick his date, it was horrible. From the time he started having chemo down there in his home by himself, till then he picked the date. It was horrible. It was ghastly, really.
And what
all
is that?
Of it was.
Yeah. So, right. And when you say it was ghastly, like what were the feelings? Was it uncertainty? Was it sadness? Was it lack of control?
All of the above.
Yeah.
Everything I can think of. I had the whole thing. I was angry. I wanted to kick things. Mm-hmm. I felt totally powerless and out of control. And knowing that it was happening, knowing that he was so sick and he was down there by himself. Once he got in hospice, that literally changed it for me. That was better. It was better until the day he said, I'm going to pick my date. Oh, that pretty much knocked me to the floor. He had talking about it and having a date for your calendar is a totally different thing. It took me, I don't think I got out of bed for about 2 days after that. That just completely wiped me out. So then you get back up again, and one foot in front of the other, as we say.
Yeah, I really appreciate that particular piece, Maureen, because what you've done is kind of laid out all kind of across the board all of the emotions, right? It's like I was angry, I wanted to kick things, and then my grief showed up in such a way that I really had to go to bed for a couple of days. I just want everybody to hear that this is really, really normal.
I think so.
So often people will call me and say, all I want to do is go to bed and pull the covers over my head. And that scares me. And I almost always say, go. It takes time and attention to be present with the grief and the reality of dying to kind of be processed. And so what I really appreciate is that you let yourself do that, right?
It was the only way I could see to get used to the idea that it was coming.
Yeah.
But I still felt like a train was coming at me until the day he took the meds. Mm-hmm. It was really crazy the last couple of weeks. I made all kinds of bad decisions. I did all kinds of weird things. And I didn't even know that I was very not even sure what the word is really, just at sea, I guess.
That's great. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Right. So once you, well, let me go back. How did it feel to be out at Bobble being there while you knew that he was taking the drugs and that he was ending his life?
It's hard to describe. A lot of shoulds in there. I felt like I should be crying. I felt like I should be sobbing my heart out. But I think at that point, I was kind of numb, and I had done that a number of times already, as you can imagine. And I actually felt kind of almost peaceful about it at that point. It did seem to take an awfully long time.
Yeah.
It seemed like it went on forever.
Well, and it does. I mean, some people die more quickly, other people die not very quickly. And so that's another thing just to understand about that whole process is it does take time. It's not an instant kind of, it's like breathing doesn't just stop and then you're gone. That's not how this works. And so, yeah, so I also appreciate that you're talking about that you kind of felt peaceful. Right, that there was a rightness and okayness about this, because this is the piece that so often throws people off in their grief, and that is that they feel a sense of relief and a sense of completion, and like there's something changes, it shifts, right? And oftentimes if people aren't crying or don't feel heartbroken, especially instantly, they think there's something wrong. There's nothing wrong, right? This is part of the way life is. When something completes itself, right? Even a human life, when it completes itself, sometimes we're going to feel relief. We're going to feel at peace. It's going to feel like it's done. This is good, right? Now, here's the thing to know about grief. Doesn't mean I'm going to stay there, right? I'm going to go all over the map. I might start peaceful, and by an hour later or 2 days later or that night, or I might wake up in the middle of the night, there's going to be a whole bunch of other feelings that start to move through, because we don't just take in instantly that someone is gone, right? So let me ask you this question, and that is, how has it been since then? How are you doing presently, and how do you notice that your grief shows up?
Well, again, it's all tangled up with COVID. It's the strangest thing, because last May, I couldn't just go out and do whatever I wanted to do after he died. I wasn't free to do that. We still weren't doing much of that. So that has cluttered it up in a way. It hasn't been a strictly point A to point B experience because of that. I think at this point, I have gotten used to it. I spent the first month, every time I thought about calling him, texting him, emailing him, having to stop myself and say, gosh, he's not there. Yeah. I thought the words, he's not there, 1,000 times.
Yeah.
And finally, I began to get used to the fact that he wasn't there, and it didn't catch me up quite the same way. And now, because COVID has let up, it has actually been easier to put one foot in front of the other and figure out what I want to do and where, and start recreating things. It's going to be different. I will never go off with anybody in a camper again to just go anywhere we wanted to go, whenever we wanted. It was absolutely joyous, and I don't have that yet. I haven't found that yet. Still looking for that kind of joy, that feeling of joy.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Maureen. It's it takes time. It takes time, and partly what I hear too is, perhaps that part of my life is over. Do you know what I mean? You know what I mean? And that's the other piece about grief. It's not just grieving the person that isn't here anymore. It's also grieving the life that I thought I was going to have with that person, or how I expected this person that I love to evolve over time, or whatever it is. And that's a really big piece of grief.
It really is.
Yeah.
A lot of empty spaces.
Right, right. And I also appreciate that you talked about, I would think I'm going to pick up the phone and call him. Or, I'm going to email Ken, right? It's like, this is just what I'm going to do. And then it's like, whoa, wait. And what I want to say about that is every time that happens, and this happens pretty much for all of us for a period of time at the beginning, every time that happens, it's like getting pushed hard up against the reality, right? That's all part of coming to terms with, oh, that's right. He's not here. It takes a long time for the body and the psyche to come to terms with what just happened. So,
yeah.
Thanks a lot, Maureen. I really appreciate everything that you've shared. So I want to move to Mark and to Esta. And Mark, maybe I'll start with you. If you wouldn't mind saying a little bit about what your journey with Annie was. And
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, Annie was our youngest of 3 kids. She was a young woman at 32 when she died. She was diagnosed on January 1st, I believe, in San Francisco. So she lived also 100 miles away from us, although we took her into our home and cared for her. So she was bubbly, sweet, the baby of the family, but also very, very competent young woman who ironically worked in a cancer center at UC San Francisco. So I think there was so much disbelief initially in this, and then the reality sunk in.
Mm-hmm.
We went through complicated treatments, chemo, exhausted ourselves, I think, in the process. And she died in our home. We were there. And I think, yeah, I was a mess, and maybe sometimes still am a mess when I think about it, but
Mm-hmm.
especially initially, I went through all of those tangled emotions in your display. I was awfully angry at this, at doctors. I was angry at God.
Mm-hmm.
I was angry at people that didn't design houses so people who were having neuropathy wouldn't fall. I mean, it was like, it's all these things that just made me furious. And I was sad and then regretful that I hadn't been a better dad,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it has softened, as you say.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is triggering all this stuff again.
Of course.
This is 3.5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Through a lot of help and talking and some passage of time, I think we're definitely functioning better.
Yeah.
I am.
Right. I really appreciate, Mark, first of all, the vulnerability that you come with, you and Esta both. I know that this is very tender. It's just a really tender place, and it will probably always be a tender place because this was your daughter and this was your youngest daughter and all of the things that come along with that. One of the things that I really appreciate you speaking to is the level of anger that you felt, right? Kind of like mad at everything, right? And I really want people to hear this because when we know someone is actively grieving, it's really important for us to remember to give them lots of space, right? Because somebody can come on saying, I really hate, I'm really angry at, I'm whatever. And the anger may seem disconnected from the actual loss itself. When you say, I was angry at people who designed houses and didn't do it better so that Annie didn't fall because she had neuropathy. That's not going to sound like a father's grief in all likelihood. But if we drop underneath, you're making it really clear. I was mad at everything. And so tell me if you think this is true, but do you think part of that anger was at the powerlessness of it, that there was nothing that as her father you could do to protect her?
I'm sure. Yeah. Now I'm sure.
Right. But
Yeah,
at the
now,
time, not so much?
At the time, I just kept thinking there had to be one step, one more thing I could have done, one more early call to her doctors when she was talking about aches and pains. If there had just been, if I had been a little more alert, I might have caught her before she fell and hurt herself, things like that.
Right, and what I want to make sure that we hear in this is it is not at all uncommon after someone that we love dies to have all kinds of little regrets, all kinds of second guessing, all kinds of guilt. And you're speaking so brilliantly to it, really, Mark, because it's like there must have been something I could have done to catch it, to see it, if we had done this instead of that, if I had listened to this, or if she had just said it a certain way, maybe I would have heard it. So all of that is also part of the grieving process itself. Okay, it's how we begin to come to terms with our own powerlessness. We have to go walk around in all of the ways that we think we should have been able to change the trajectory of life, right? Yeah. And that's something none of us can do. If you're a father, if you're a mother, if you're a sister, if you're a neighbor, if it's your partner, we can't change what that particular life energy is going to do, even though there's a part of us that I think, especially as parents, we think we should be able to do to protect our children. Yeah. So thanks for that. I'm going to come over to Esther for a minute. We're going to kind of go back and forth here. So Esther, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience and how this was for you? Before you do that, I just want to tell everybody, one of the things to remember here is that husbands and wives are going to experience things very differently when they're losing a child, and when they're grieving, and when they're finding their way back into life in a way that they want to. So anyway, I just want to point that out. So go ahead.
Well, when we found out she had cancer, we met her at the UC. No, it was Kaiser in San Francisco. She said she was going to go to the emergency, and I said, well, take an Uber. And she said, don't worry, Mom. So we got there as soon as we could. We were in Fort Bragg at the time. And when we got there, first of all, they did some kind of a scan of her brain, and because she was having horrible headaches, And I even said to Mark, oh, I hope she doesn't have a brain tumor. And he said, she doesn't have a brain tumor. Well, anyway, after they had done that scan, she had like 8 or 9 tumors in her brain. And I thought, well, I've known people that have brain tumors, and they've lived. So I still had some hope. But then they did more scans of her whole body. And the next day, the doctor came in, she was in the hospital, and said, well, she's got it in her liver, her spine, her kidney, her bones. And I thought, oh, it's hopeless, so.
Right. And that's kind of the beginning of your grief, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like,
I thought, how long does she have? I didn't want to talk about it in front of her, but I, ran after the doctor, and I said, and they can't tell you, and they never do. But anyway, I thought, man, do we have her for another month? Do we have her, So anyway, they had all these ideas. They were going to do radiation on her brain and all this stuff. So we stayed in San Francisco for that. But after we got her home, then they were going to start chemo. But she was so sick, she couldn't even start chemo yet. So it took a while. And all this time, I'm thinking, gee, how much time do we have? Let's get this show on the road,
Right.
Anyway, they finally started her on chemo, and she just couldn't tolerate it. I mean, she got so sick from the chemo. She had 1 or 2, I think, that she kind of had a little bit of progress, but then she was falling, and you know, it was pretty horrible 8 months. But the one thing I was thankful for, and I will always be thankful for, is that we had her with us those last 8 months, because we were able to tell her every day that we loved her, and it still made me feel like I was taking care of my daughter, you know.
Right.
And we tried to make things as comfortable and happy for her as we could, but she was pretty darn sick.
Right.
But I remember, as far as the two of us being different, I just thought, I'm not angry at God, because what can he do? I mean, I don't really believe there could be a miracle, but I thought, she's got it in her lungs, her kidneys, her spine, her brain, her bones. There's no hope. You know, I'm just praying for peace. I'm praying for comfort and, you know, release of her pain. But I didn't really feel like I could blame God for what she had. But the worst part, I think, was, you know, people will say things like, well, it's going to be such a relief when it's over. I honestly, to God, did not feel relieved, because even though she was sick as she was, laying in bed, she was still alive. I still had my daughter. You know, I mean, she could hardly talk or anything, but I still had her. But it was pretty hard when she died, because first of all, I just thought, I just want to get that hospital bed out of here. I want to get that room back to the way it was before, with, you know. And so anyway, Apria, or somebody who brings you all the furniture, they came to get her bed a day or two later. And I was like thinking, I'm so relieved they're getting that thing out of here. But after he took it, I just broke down crying uncontrollably, because I thought, oh my gosh, it's really true, she's not here anymore, you know. And I couldn't stop crying. So Mark, we called Kaiser, because I thought, I just need a tranquilizer or something, you know, to calm me down. And they wanted me to go to the ER, because they said I might be having a heart attack. I said, I'm not having a heart attack, you know.
I'm living in a broken heart.
So this nurse gets the doctor on the phone, and he says, you know, a lot of times this happens. People that are grieving, they do have heart attacks, and the only way we can be sure is if you go to the ER. So we went to the ER. There all day long in this horrible place with people of all.
Anyway. So let me stop you for just a minute. So again, you're speaking beautifully to this idea that there's no right way or wrong way to grieve, right? So some people are going to feel some relief. Other people don't feel any. And then your thought of, just get this stuff out of here, I'll start to feel, it'll feel better if it's out of there, and then bang, it's actually the opposite experience that you expected. I just don't want us to miss this point, right? The mind, the brain, is not going to do grief. The body does grief. It will take us places that we can't see coming, and it will not take us places where we expect to go, right? So we just don't know for sure what it's going to look like. So Esta didn't feel relief. What I'm hearing you say is that what you felt was, I just don't have my child.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't
really
have
over.
her,
It's
and
really
it's over. And I don't know how I'm going to put one foot in front of the other.
Yeah, and people, you know, friends and stuff were really, they were so loving and trying to help. But I honestly, I mean, I didn't feel like doing things like they'd say, oh, let's go to this show. And I'm the type of person that I don't want to hurt their feelings, so I went. But I didn't feel like it. You know, I mean, and everybody was really nice to us. We had meals coming in and all kinds of stuff, but that doesn't take away the pain.
Which is another thing that I think you bring up a really great point, and that is, so often there's an expectation that we should get back to our regular life as soon as possible because we'll do better. That's not necessary. It's only not necessarily true, but it's really not what heals our grief. It's like I actually have to be with it. So often people in the midst of their, especially their immediate grief, they don't want to do anything. And everybody, well-meaning, right? But because we live in a culture that doesn't have this conversation, everybody's doing the thing that they think is best for the person that they love that's grieving.
Yeah.
Let's just go do something, right? Let's do something. Let's stay busy. How many times has any of us heard, well, I'm just going to get busy because then I don't have to feel. I just want you to hear that that does not change anything. In fact, if what I do is get busy in the external world long term instead of feeling my grief, I am going to start to cause some problems internally with me, not only emotionally, but they can even come out physically, right? If I clamp down around my grief, pretty soon I'm going to have to start clamping down on other feelings as well, and we can end up feeling depressed, we can end up feeling numb, we can feel like we're not engaged in life anymore. And usually when I work with people, it's because there is unresolved anger or grief laying underneath somewhere, right? So as well-meaning as people are when they want to start getting you out of the house and doing your normal activities, if it's not what you really want to do, it's really okay to say no.
Right? I know. I'm still trying to learn how to say no.
Yeah,
I'm not good at it.
We all are, right? Yeah. And I understand that. So, can you speak a little bit to how this process has been for you in terms of the grieving process from the time of Annie's death, kind of moving forward?
Okay. Well, it's gotten a lot better now after 3.5 years. The first part was pretty hard. And I remember we did get into a grief group, which helped at Kaiser, and then found you, and that was the biggest help. But I remember at first, like I have a lot of girlfriends and stuff, and so I have some outlets to talk. But for Mark, I think it's mostly me. So anyway, at night, I'd finally be just relaxing and reading, and then Mark would start talking about Annie. And then all the pain would come back up again. It was like, oh man, I was just starting to relax,
Right.
But,
so I'm glad you're speaking to that, because I want to kind of you with this, because it's really true that some of us are more internal and more introverted, and some of us are more external and maybe more extroverted. And so when we don't match energies like that in our grief, it can make things uncomfortable. So I guess I want to ask the two of you how you have navigated that, or have you? I mean, I can imagine there are times that it's uncomfortable for both of you.
Yeah, well, I could speak a little bit for myself anyway. I know it's still an issue, but we've had to grapple with that, and I try not to start that up at bedtime. I've learned that much, right? Okay.
Right.
And but I didn't do well finding friends to walk around and grieve with. I don't have that as many as a social butterfly. So, but I'll read every book that Julie recommends, and poems, and it's been wonderful. But for me, it's drawing inward a lot, and talking to Esta at certain times, and I guess I have come to realize, I think I've always known we both just deeply lost, and feel this loss, even though she doesn't want to hear me ramble on and on and on about it, and blubber and rage and whatever I was doing.
Right.
Yeah.
What you're talking about is one of the reasons why it's so helpful to get help, to reach out to someone and have a place where you can do all of the emoting, all of the conversation, so you get to move that energy, right? We all need it. Part of healing is we have to tell our story over and over and over again. And it's not our friends and our family that are going to be able to tolerate that usually. It needs to be somebody that's a professional, or maybe you have a friend that just kind of has the space for all of that. And we also have to make time in our own lives to like just let it out sometimes, right? I mean, I'm known for, I will yell and kick boxes around if I have to, right? I mean, and sometimes that's what actually feels good to me. It's like I have to do it, right? There are some other things that can be helpful, and one of the things that I talk to clients about all the time and that I've used in my own life, and that is taking time to sit down and literally write a physical letter to the person that you love that you have lost, okay? One of the reasons why this is so helpful is because if you sit down and just start like a stream of consciousness letter, one that says, if it was Annie, it would be, "Dear Annie, I miss you," and so out comes all the stuff that you're feeling, whether it's regrets, whether it's guilt, whether it's, I don't know how I'm going to breathe anymore if with your loss, whatever's in there, you want to put it all on paper, right? Now, I have occasionally with those letters actually folded them up, put them in an envelope, and stuck them in a mailbox. There's nothing on them. There's no address or anything, but I just do it to just as a symbol of moving it out into the universe, right? I don't always do that. The thing to consider is that the next step that you would take is to wait 24 to 72 hours and then let your loved one write back to you. In other words, the letter is now going to say, "Dear Julie." And now I just kind of let come through whatever comes through that person might want to say to me, right? And take the time to hear it, to listen to it, to be with it. I actually have done this 3 different times with regard to my mother after she died. I think I told you earlier that she died 6 years ago now. And every once in a while, my grief would come up really big. And whenever that would happen, I would sit down and write a letter to her and let her write back to me. And it's very healing. It can be really comforting and kind of inclusive. So there are ways to move that energy. Sometimes it really is letting the anger fly, or sometimes what it means is I crumble onto the floor in grief and I weep and weep and weep. That's also part of moving the energy. So there's all kinds of different ways that help us through this. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that you guys are willing to share that, Esther, you had to say what wasn't working for you, right? Which is a good thing. You know, I mean, we all have to say, you know, I can listen to you, but I can't listen to you at 10 o'clock at night. Or maybe it would be better if we went to the park so that we were outside and grounded in nature to have this conversation, right? There's a whole bunch of ways that we can use to help ground ourselves when we're in the middle of such big loss, right? So I just want to look at my notes here just to make sure we're covering things. So do you want to talk a little bit, Mark, about Julia?
Yeah, well, Julia was my sister. I had 3. And she was the one closest to me in age and lived in New Mexico. And we have a lot of interests in common. I always felt emotionally close to her, even though we fought as little kids over all kinds of things and everything. But it's so ironically, when Annie was sick and dying, Julia was diagnosed with lymphoma. And also a terminal case, although she did go into a few remissions. So So a couple of months after Annie died, we siblings were trying to share her care because she lived alone way out in the high plains of near Santa Fe and was all alone and going through chemo. So Esther and I went out and spent some time there with her, and it was just such an odd experience, I guess, in a way, because we were still just grieving Annie, and then here was another one who was, losing hair and going through the same thing, who was just so dear to me, and she was yet also very much more open than Annie was about talking about her own illness and death, and this was another thing that we didn't talk too much about our death with our young daughter. She wanted to live, and Julia knew much more that what was coming. So we spent that time and then left, and then all through COVID had to carry on our care, if you want to call it that, over the Zoom calls. And it just, that was another experience, kind of tore me up. And, but we spent a lot of quality time, and even just, she very frankly talked to my sisters and I one day and said, I'm not going to be around much longer, and let me know which paintings of mine you'd like. She was an artist. And so it was a much different experience, but she knew and was very forthright, and then that allowed us to also express and talk with her until the day before she died.
Right. I had the lovely pleasure of knowing Julia, and she was quite a force on the planet. I think about her every once in a while because while I never met her in person, but we talked on the phone often, and you make a really lovely point, and that is that she was so willing to talk about it. Yeah. And I know that the three of you were close and connected, and I'm just going to share this because I know this piece that you guys wrote together. Yeah. Would get together and write together and then read what you wrote. And I wanted to share that just because that too is a really powerful practice, right? So this is not necessarily the grief after the loss, but the grief that is going on during the completion months of someone's life, and how powerful that can be. That you're speaking to how you stayed connected through this pandemic. Maureen talked about the same thing. How do we stay connected, right? Lots and lots of us on the planet are still grieving what we lost through the last 2 years of the pandemic. So I really appreciate that all of you have spoken to the overlay of COVID and the pandemic, because that in itself created a loss that affects all of the actual personal loss that's also going on. And so as we're moving forward as a planet, I really think of the whole planet, the whole globe, being in grief right now, right? Some of us lost people during the pandemic and weren't able to be there the way we wanted to be. And we've lost all kinds of things due to the fact that we couldn't connect. And so the personal grief is going to feel just that much more intense, I think, because we're not just grieving on one level, which is also something to keep in mind, which is every time I have a loss, it's going to touch all my previous losses, which is one of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking, Mark, is that, you were still grieving Annie, you're still grieving Annie, but you were there beginning to grieve Julia too. And so you guys were getting touched on a whole bunch of levels, which also at some level kind of complicates grief. And I just want to mention this briefly. I know we're getting close to time. And that is when we have more than one loss to grieve at a time, it's going to take us longer. It's going to feel different. There's going to be a lot of intensity around it. There can also be some numbness around it, right? Sometimes people will come to me and say, well, I'm not really feeling anything. I just feel numb. And in fact, I think, Maureen, you mentioned feeling numb at some point. I just want to say again that all of this is really normal, and it's to be expected. It's just that so often we need a place to talk about it and to get some validation for the experience that we're having. So given that, I'm going to ask Sean to put up on the screen just a very short list of books that I think are extremely helpful. This is not a complete list by any stretch of the imagination. One is called Permission to Mourn by Tom Zuba. Life After Loss by Martha Hickman. There's The Wild Edge of Sorrow by Frances Weller, which is excellent. There is the one by Megan Devine called It's Okay That You're Not Okay. And Alan Wolfelt has also done a nice one called Healing a Spouse's Grieving Heart. Okay, those are all good resources. There are many more. And if you go online and just research any kind of support for grief, you will find things. And thanks, Sean, for putting up this last piece, which is, if anyone, I just want to mention this, we aren't talking about surviving suicide today, but if you have experienced a suicide death, there is a lovely organization called Survivors of Suicide. They have a great deal of information. They have a line that you can call. There's all kinds of support out here for survivors of suicide as well. So we could talk about this for a really long time, and we have just touched the surface today. But the first thing I want to do is just thank every one of you that joined me today, because, like I said, I so appreciate that you were willing to bring your vulnerability and your hearts and your experience into this space, because all of us as human beings are going to experience loss, and it matters that we have the conversations, and it matters that we know that we're not alone in our grief. So thank you very much. I do want to ask Sean to put my website and my phone number up, so that if you want help or you want to contact me in any way for any reason, you can do that through my website, and that's julieinterrante.com, or you can call me directly on my cell phone, 916-709-0959. And I want to thank ACC for the invitation to be here and to have this conversation. And I just want to thank all of you so very much for taking the time to have these conversations in dying. It's been lovely to be with you. Thank you. So now we just have